Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and tonight I'm going to be talking about the topic of divine revelation. A huge topic, a very important topic, and I'm going to be dealing with the specific, prickly issue of how do we distinguish between true divine revelation and false divine revelation. That's going to be the question that I attempt to answer based on my own experience and my own studies in this video tonight. So, divine revelation is a hugely important part of particularly the Abrahamic faiths, but also features quite heavily in Western esotericism. All of the major Abrahamic faiths began as a result of a prophet or a spiritual figure being given a divine revelation of some kind to then spread with the masses and teach the ways of the divine. So it's hugely important to the foundation of Western religion, of monotheistic religion as we know it today. And, you know, it's a very evocative kind of an image of the prophet before God, with the smoke rising up from the altar, deep in fervent prayer, receiving the message that is going to change the course of history. I'm watching the series House of David at the moment, and in the first episode there's a depiction of the prophet Samuel in this kind of state of prayer in front of the altar on the high place. And it's a very powerful image and very important to many of the religions of the world. This idea of a revealed tradition, a revealed knowledge that forms the basis of a holy text, and so on. And unfortunately, I think in modern times, in the more kind of modern interpretations of some of these religions, we see a move away from belief in revelation and its importance. It's just an invention, and as such, it can be easily disposed of or altered by adopting the kind of wisdom of whatever the spirit of the age is. Even if it's a wicked age, I think that while it's important to acknowledge that, anything that human beings ultimately write down can never be absolute truth because of our inherent limitations, I do think it's important to acknowledge that there is a spiritual side to the human experience. We're not just these biological machines that respond to the laws of nature. There is a spiritual experience we can have which transcends ordinary life and gives us a greater insight into higher truths. And who's to say that what has come down to us in the form of the holy text is not indeed an example of such truth being put to paper? It's not just the major Abrahamic faiths that make a claim of divine revelation. You've got, in Western esotericism, the most famous example of Aleister Crowley receiving the Book of the Law and later the other holy books of Thelema. Very different kind of a spirit to that of the monotheistic religions, but revealed nonetheless. In Elizabethan times, you had John Dee and Edward Kelly communicating with the Enochian angels and receiving revelations from them, which ultimately formed the basis of their Enochian magical system. And in more recent decades, in the New Age movement, you've got books like A Course in Miracles or Conversations with God, which also make this claim of being divinely, if not revealed texts, then certainly divinely inspired texts. So it's actually something that is a common part of the human experience and a common way that we seek to understand the truth. But now a problem emerges because we've got all of these claims of divine revelation, and they're actually, in many respects, competing claims, and sometimes, in some respects, they can even seem to contradict one another. And there definitely seem to be some examples of divine revelation and claims of divine revelation which are more sincere than others, There's a lot of false prophets. There's a lot of scammers. And there's people who are well-meaning, who are trying to gain some kind of revealed knowledge, but perhaps something else has interfered and corrupted the process. And so we need a way of distinguishing between true revelation and false revelation. Or, to use less kind of morally charged terms, to access that part of consciousness which allows us to receive downloads, which can be considered authentic revelation, versus where we've tried to engage in that process and it's gone awry in some way, it's been unsuccessful in some way, or perhaps we're just pretending that we have gone through that process when in fact we're just coming up with something with our own ego, with our own conscious mind, or perhaps inspired by a very different type of spirit to the one we claim to be speaking for. So I'm going to be looking at how we can distinguish between those things tonight. So let's get the obvious stuff out of the way first. As I just said, there are some people who claim to be prophets, claim to have received divine messages, who are really just scammers. And if the story of how they got that divine revelation seems a little bit scammy, or like it doesn't quite add up, or it seems like they're trying to evade the real truth by coming up with an elaborate story in order to not give a straight answer, in those situations, you've got to, particularly if the individual in question has got a reputation and a history of being a confidence man, someone who runs hustles and scams, you've really got to question the veracity of that person's claim to prophethood. So that's the obvious stuff out of the way. But we can have other examples where there are perhaps very godly people who are seeking to contact the divine and think that they've succeeded, but something's interfering with them. And the kind of the motive of the person who is trying to understand God's will, who has dark forces interfering with the process and trying to insert something else to make them deviate from the path, is a theme that appears again and again in religion. It's faced by even the most genuine of holy people. So it's definitely something that we need to guard against if we come from a tradition, such as the Western esoteric tradition, where we ourselves seek to receive divine knowledge using particular means and methods. And there's a few ways that we can guard against false revelation, which I'm going to look into now. So first, let's consider the Enochian system more closely, because that's a very good example of a system where revealed divine knowledge is very much a feature of the system. So if you don't know much about the Enochian system of magic, check out my Enochian playlist. But in a nutshell, these two Elizabethan magicians, John Dee and Edward Kelly, conducted a series of scrying sessions where they used a crystal as a divination tool to contact angels. They were given a whole method for contacting the angels more deeply by those angels, which became known as the Enochian system of magic. And this formed the basis of a means for ordinary human beings practicing white magic to communicate with God's angels and receive spiritual knowledge and wisdom. And so this was kind of going on during the angelic conferences with Dee and Kelly. But it wasn't all kind of smooth sailing during these angelic communications. There were a number of occasions where there were so-called wicked spirits which were trying to pass themselves off as angels and interfere with the communications and give knowledge that was false. And it later was revealed Edward Kelly had been given these false revelations, which fortunately were identified. In Dr. John Dee's Spiritual Diaries by Merrick Kossabon at page 328, there is a list of so-called manifold horrible doctrines that were given to Kelly by these wicked spirits, which are described in the following terms: that Jesus was not God, that no prayer ought to be made to Jesus, that there is no sin, that man's soul doth go from one body to another child's quickening or animation, that as many men and women as are now have always been, that is, so many human bodies and human souls, neither more nor less as are now, have always been, that the generation of mankind from Adam and Eve is not an history, but a writing which hath another sense. No Holy Ghost they acknowledged. They would not suffer him to pray to Jesus first, but would rebuke him, saying that he robbed God of his honour, and so on. These are examples of revelations which ran contrary to the body of knowledge that was being received in a particular revelatory act by John Dee and Edward Kelly. As you can tell from the manifold horrible doctrines, so-called, the Enochian system is very much religiously... Okay, one of the baby's toys just activated all by itself. Just had to go turn it off. I'm a little freaked out because I'm talking about how to identify when wicked spirits are trying to interfere with the revelatory process, and then this just happened. So, sometimes I make videos and something doesn't want me to make them, and I have a feeling that this is one of those videos. So I've said a prayer to Saint Michael. We're just going to power on through. So where was I? So the manifold horrible doctrines, so-called, that Kelly received from the wicked spirits ran very much contrary to the Christian worldview. And the Enochian system of magic, if we take it at face value as it is very much situated in a Christian paradigm in terms of the religious beliefs that form the core of that. There are other practices surrounding that core belief which come from a little bit from Hermeticism, a lot from Jewish mysticism, but it's got that Christian core. And so the integrity of the rest of the body of revealed knowledge that the angels gave to Dee and Kelly, which hung on that paradigm, would have been compromised by these other doctrines. And I'm no stranger to receiving revelations which seem a little bit bogus upon reflection. I've done extensive Enochian rituals, as you would know if you followed this channel for some time, and other forms of angelic magic in order to receive knowledge. And there have been times where, when I was engaging in those sessions, I wrote stuff down which didn't really come from the divine. And when I really was honest with myself and really reflected and focused on what I had been given, what was written down, I had to face that truth. And in my case, I don't think it was wicked spirits, perhaps indirectly, but it came from my own consciousness, my own mind, my own beliefs that I had formed as a result of, going through the world, forming certain impressions and having certain biases, and then bringing those into the ritual with me, and instead of checking them at the door, bringing those into the ritual with me and allowing the ego and the conscious mind to speak with the voice of the angels, and without really checking it, because I wanted a certain thing to be true, and then trying to pass that off as angelic communications. So one example of this was, at one point I was very fixated with trying to make my kind of metaphysical vision of the universe fit with the four elements. And so I wrote down this revelation in one of my angelic sessions, which gave a fourfold division of the forces of the universe. But the true revelation that I'd been given, which came naturally and freely, was that there was a threefold division, that God was triune in nature. And this just didn't fit with that. And, as I was eventually reviewing all of the revelations I'd been given over the years to try and identify and cull the false revelations, this was one of the revelations that didn't make the final cut. There were other things about it, which I'll go through later, which were kind of, markers of false revelation. But one of them was that it was kind of trying to supersede this previous doctrine of the threefold divinity that I'd been given with this bogus fourfold divinity that didn't fit with the scheme at all, but which is what I wanted to be true at the time. Another example is, again, I was going into an angelic communication session, and rather than listening to what the angels actually said, I let them be drowned out by what my conscious mind wanted to be true, what I had been influenced into believing by other things I was involved in my life at the time, and bringing that into the ritual and writing that down, and mind trying to pass that off as divine revelation. In this case, it was a false teaching that humanity is God, that the divine is really something that is not wondrous or awe-inspiring at all, but is just kind of like a force of nature which doesn't really do very much and doesn't have much of a bearing on our everyday lives. Doesn't love us. A lot like the deist kind of idea of God. All in all, a very cold and uninspired vision of divinity. And what was subtracted from divinity was added to humanity, so that we were the sole source of everything that we attribute to God. And that was taken to such an extreme that we were in fact God, and there was no other God besides humanity. And so it was kind of like a humanism, but like a spiritual humanism. And later, as I was reviewing my revelations, this too was a false revelation. There was nothing suggested in any of the earlier revelations which would have pointed towards this doctrine. It was something that I just came up with myself and then got grafted onto what was divinely inspired. As I had more spiritual experiences and more insights, I began to understand the divine more fully and understand that there is a divine presence in this universe which is much greater than human beings, is greater than anything in fact, and so is worthy of worship, and we exist within that, and everything that we do that is great, even if we are the arbiters of a particular moral system, we do all that only by the power of God and because we are the image of God. And that God, furthermore, has a kind of intelligence to it and can have a relationship with us and loves us. And that was the thing, that was the true revelation that came to me later through authentic spiritual experiences to clarify some of the earlier revelations that I had where this ambiguity could emerge, where the divine really didn't matter and it was humanity that was the most important thing. But I was able to thankfully clarify the truth. There is no God but God. And if you're interested in seeing me elaborate more on those insights that I had into God, go check out my video on why AI cannot and should not rewrite the Bible. I go into some detail about them there. So in my own practice of angelic magic, I've successfully been able to distinguish between true revelation and false revelation. But how did I do it? Well, the first thing to realize, the first step in doing this is taking the proactive step of, when you're in the ritual chamber, invoking a force that compels whatever other spirit you're dealing with to give you only the truth. So we saw in the earlier example of the horrible doctrines from Enochian magic that the wicked spirits abhorred the name of Jesus Christ. They got very angry when the name of Christ was called upon. And this is something that you'll hear a lot from exorcists as well, that demonic spirits cannot stand the name of Christ. And that has certainly been my experience as well. Whenever I've gone into a ritual and I have tested the spirit immediately by saying, in the name of Christ, give me only the truth, I've found that I have no problems, that I get a truthful answer to my questions. When I don't do that, I'm much more vulnerable to deception in some way. And, if you don't believe in Christ in that way, I respect that. Everybody's on their own journey. I'm not bringing up Christ to push any kind of religious agenda. I hate it when people do that. But that's something that I've incorporated into my own spiritual practice. If that's not your trip, if that's not where you're at on your path, I respect that. There's other God names that you can use. For example, invoking the name Iao is something that you can do to compel whatever spiritual influence might be in the room with you to tell you only the truth. In the Thoth tarot deck, I don't know if it's still the case, but back when I got mine, it came with this little booklet which taught you how to do different readings, and there was a little invocation that you could do over the cards before a reading to make sure that the cards gave truthful answers to all your questions. And a key part of that invocation was in the name of Iao, and so on. So that's another powerful God name you can use to compel the truth. And, because you can do all the banishings in the world, but, that can wear off after a while. If you don't remain vigilant in the ritual, it's like in the horror films when there's a magic circle drawn in salt and somebody accidentally kicks the circle and creates an opening in the circle. We can metaphorically create openings in our own circle when we lose our focus. And so it's always important to keep testing the spirits in that way. And then you'll get truthful answers to your questions, hopefully. But now there's an important point here, because you can say in the name of Christ or in the name of Jesus as much as you want, but words on their own are meaningless. The word needs to be matched with the right intention. And to believe that the word is enough without the intention is nothing more than superstition and is doomed to failure. And there are plenty of people who use the name of Jesus constantly who are utterly under the influence of the dark powers. I'm thinking of, for example, the movie Jesus Camp, where there were these Baptists who organized a Christian camp for children where they were indoctrinating children into Christian fundamentalism. And one of the exercises that they got the children to do was effectively worship a cardboard cutout of George W. Bush, who was president at the time. And these are conservative Christians effectively promoting images of the beast, something akin to the abomination of desolation, promoting the idolatry of a leader. And yet these people claim to be on God's side, and they invoke the name of Jesus constantly, but their hearts are empty. And that's the difference. So you just have to have the right intention when you use these names of power. Right. But, no one is perfect 100% of the time. You can try and have, vigilance in the practice and the right intentions in invoking the right kinds of energies to give you the truth, but sometimes you still get a result where false revelation slips through. Where you slip up a little bit, where there's an imperfection in the practice, an imperfection in the communication, an interference, you might say, in the radio signal. So then, once you have your revealed knowledge that you've written down after a scrying session or whatever it is, recorded perhaps, whatever it is, how do you then review that after the fact to identify anything which might be false revelation rather than true revelation. Well, at this point, I would like to share something which was given to me by my former Reiki master, Travis Mills, who sadly passed away earlier this year. But one of the things he left me with, which I'd like to share with you now, is a method of how to evaluate psychic guidance and channeling by Corin McLaughlin. I found this list very helpful and very much in keeping with what I myself have found as I've distinguished true revelation from false revelation. So it's good to be corroborated in that way. So I'm going to go through the list now. McLaughlin gives 2 columns. One which is an example of lower psychism, and then next to it there will be the contrasting example of higher psychism. Lower psychism being false revelation coming from the desires, from the passions, from the lower parts of us, and higher psychism being revelation that comes from the more divine levels of consciousness. So here are Corin McLaughlin's guidelines for distinguishing lower and higher psychism. Messages gained through lower psychism are usually only for the benefit of the person receiving them, and sometimes tell the person to have something at the expense of another. In contrast, messages based on higher psychism will always promote the good of the whole. Messages received through lower psychism will flatter the ego of the receiver. They will say that they're special in some way, that they should be considered separate or superior to others in some way. They feed the desire for power and greed and justify the pursuit of such things. And the purpose of such communications is often just to satisfy curiosity. In contrast, a message from the levels of higher psychism will focus on helping other people, including other people, and will be in the service of others, not just to satisfy a curiosity. A message from the realms of lower psychism may create feelings of negativity, of fear, perhaps even unworthiness or shame. In contrast, a message from the levels of higher psychism creates inspiration, creates a sense of love, and really empowers the person receiving the message. A message received from lower psychism will demand obedience and the surrender of the person's will. A message received from higher psychism will never demand obedience. It may advise a certain course of action, but always will emphasize the importance of the person using their own free will in order to accept the truth and in order to make their own decisions. A message from lower psychism may conflict with a person's personal ethics. A message from higher psychism never conflicts with a person's personal ethics. The source of a message from lower psychism claims authority for itself. In higher psychism, the message is always attributed to some higher power, such as God or Christ or a Buddha or something like that. A message from lower psychism is often a rehash of empty platitudes that can be found anywhere. They're very general and kind of wishy-washy in nature, and can sometimes contradict the teachings of major religions and the inspired wisdom that comes from them. In higher psychism, the information that is given is something entirely new and novel and original, perhaps even a new and original synthesis of existing ideas, and it does not conflict with existing religious wisdom, but rather finds a harmony with them. False revelation from lower psychism is often long and rambly and confusing. In higher psychism, the message is short, succinct, and to the point. A simple statement that strikes very deep, using very simple but effective language. In lower psychism, you'll often be able to distinguish not one but many voices competing for attention, sometimes trying to override one another, whereas in higher psychism this cacophony does not exist. There is a single voice, and it is a still, small voice. When a communication is coming through lower psychism, the channel may enter a trance state to the extent that they lose control of themselves and may actually do or say things which are quite embarrassing for them. When somebody is receiving a message from higher psychism, they're able to have more control over the experience. They're still receiving a download, but they're able to put things into their own words. But the person remains conscious of what is being said. This one I don't really get or have any real strong feelings towards. Lower psychism is apparently received through the solar plexus, higher psychism through the higher chakras, through the head, heart and throat chakras functioning in unison. I mean, if you want to translate this into layperson's terms, you might say that one comes from the desires, the other comes through our ability to get in tune with our heart. Finally, lower psychism promotes the idea that spiritual growth happens with no effort, whereas higher psychism gives the hard truth that spiritual growth requires great effort. And those are the criteria that Corin McLaughlin gives. Now, when I first saw this, I thought it was a pretty neat list, and I still think it's pretty good, and certainly has been reflective of my own process in separating the wheat from the chaff in terms of revelations I've received over the years in my various angelic workings. But upon looking at this list again, there's a few things I'm not quite as convinced on. Perhaps it's just a matter of interpreting that particular point in the right way. So point number 2 talks about how lower psychism will create a sense of specialness and separation for the other person, and in contrast, higher psychism includes a sense of inclusivity. As soon as I saw that word, I know that it meant something different in the 80s, but it just set my teeth on edge. I thought maybe something from traditional religion is being attacked here that really doesn't deserve it. So I had a closer look, and I think there's certainly a place for a sense of specialness and separation. We are all special in some way. God gives us a particular mission that we need to follow, and has chosen people throughout history for different things. Doesn't make that person better than another person, but it means that only they can do the task that God has appointed them. And in that sense, they are special, and they are set apart, and holiness is set apart as something that we acknowledge as being worth more value than ordinary worldly things. And that's a theme that repeats again and again throughout the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. But I see what this point is getting at, that if a person sets themselves above others, then that's a bad thing. And if there's a communication that encourages that, then that's lower psychism. But that's not to say that everybody has to be the same. We all have to be in this sort of communist society where nobody is different. I think that would come from lower psychism if there was a revelation to that effect. So just, I think it's important to bear that distinction in mind. Point 3, lower psychism creates feelings of fear and negativity, perhaps even unworthiness. Look, sometimes in divine revelation, we do receive messages that, whether that was the intention or not, can make us feel fearful or can make us feel unworthy when we contrast our own nature to the nature of the divine, or to the nature that we could have if we repent. And we can have fear when we consider what's going to happen to the human race in the future if they don't manage to do that. So, sometimes the truth is not love and light and positivity. Sometimes, there are some, if you want to know the truth about the future and you want to know the truth about human nature, sometimes it's not very flattering. I don't necessarily think that that's an indicator of lower psychism. I think to say that everything is fine, everything is good, you're always worthy, you're always valid no matter what you do, and hold people unaccountable for anything, that's more like a lower psychism than anything else. But, you know, when we do have these difficult truths about the state of humanity or the state of the world that we're confronted with, it doesn't mean that we should personally be ashamed or that we should live in fear. Those are negative reactions to those truths. But sometimes we just need a warning that a certain course of action is going to lead to negative consequences down the track. Point 5 is also a bit strange. It says lower psychism communications may conflict with one's personal ethics, whereas higher psychism will respect one's personal ethics. I think it depends on your ethics. I can see what this point is getting at. And going back to Enochian magic, I'm reminded of the story where one of the angels purportedly told Dee and Kelly that they should swap wives, which was very disturbing to them. So in this instance, we see the personal ethics of Dee and Kelly to be faithful to their wives as they had sworn they would do, versus the ethics outside of that frame that was being promoted to them, which would fly in the face of all of that and throw all of that into chaos and disorder. I think that's kind of what this point is getting at. However, a person's personal ethics can often be quite bad. A person's subjective idea of morality can be quite terrible. And if something from the divine comes in to challenge that and push us outside the comfort zone of that, I think that can be a very good thing and an indicator of true revelation rather than false revelation. And I'm reminded of a time in my own Enochian workings when I was having a vision and I was sort of in conversation with an angel, and we were talking about the morality of retaliating against evil that had been done to a person, and how can we stop evil while still remaining good. I had previously been a radical leftist, and so I had a very twisted and distorted idea of what is right and wrong. And I was saying to the angel that I believed that if we're confronted with evil, then we should use any means necessary to destroy evil, no matter how harmful or destructive those means were, because the ends ultimately justified the means. And the angel slammed me for this, saying that that was wrong, and in fact, when we are confronted with evil and we need to respond to evil, we should never be more evil than our opponent in our response. And in fact, to do so is a worse fate than being removed from this existence. And that it would be better to be removed from this existence than to go down that road. And, you know, it was very unadulterated, no sugarcoating. The angel told me that this is the way that you should respond to evil. And I protested. I actually argued with the angel in the vision about this kind of moral question and how I thought that wasn't fair and it wasn't realistic. And eventually, and it took some time, I had to admit that the angel was right. But at the time, it very much took me outside my comfort zone. So this is an example of how a bad set of personal ethics can actually be challenged by genuine divine revelation. But I want to finish with this one point. I've gone through a lot of methods for distinguishing between true and false revelation. I don't think that there is any revealed knowledge which is absolute, which is purely divine, and doesn't have any human element interfering with it at all, and which is absolutely true for all time. I think that there's always going to be, a little bit of humanity that gets included in divine revelation because it's filtered through us. It's inevitable that some of us comes through with it and colours it in some way. And perhaps that is why there are contradictions between different revealed texts, because they represent the thinking of different times and different cultures which perhaps clash with one another in certain respects. But just because there is no perfect or absolute divine revelation does not mean that it is not a worthwhile exercise to receive divine revelation, because we are still getting knowledge from a higher place in consciousness than just rational understanding, and it allows us to get a deeper set of truths and a deeper understanding into the universe and our place within it, and how to treat one another than we would have got any other way. It's a way of transcending the spirit of the times to get to a deeper and more holistic truth, and ultimately bring people together more around a more solid set of principles than what might already exist in a particular society. And so for that reason, I think that divine revelation is still important. I think that it is a real thing based on my own experiences and my own spiritual practices. But I do think it is important to distinguish between true and false revelation, and that there is a distinction. And I hope that tonight I've given you some understanding of how you can distinguish between them, so that you don't end up following something which is a false prophecy. So thank you for listening to all of that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to this channel to support my work, leave any comments you have down below, and if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.